right, well, welcome everyone for joining us today, where we're going to start to dive into what are we going to do with ourselves next year, looking at IT in 2023, as well as some of the trends that got us here and a few other pieces. So I'm really excited about today's panel, where we'll be going in and talking a little bit more about what to expect in 2023. So what are some of the trends? How do you kind of plan, forecast, budget, what's on the minds, and how can we approach everything when the year kind of seems to be up in the air, shall we say? And so I'm your host, Chase. Let me get that. And I'm joined today with Rob and Steven, and we'll be diving in kind of background understanding, kind of how we can approach some of these different pieces. And so just quick bit of housekeeping. So as you have questions, feel free to throw them into the questions or kind of chat. We'll add that into our panelists and kind of walk through and hear their thoughts in terms of if it's similar, something different, or kind of how you're thinking about approaching the year yourselves. And so let's go ahead and dive in. Let's start there. So I'm actually going to just, kill slides. We'll get right back into the panel, and we'll start with Steven. So Steven, if you can introduce yourself, kind of background, organization, kind of your role within it, and then we'll hand the reins over to Rob.
Yeah, so as Chase said, I'm Steven. I work for a company called WebSpec. We're based out of Urbandale, Iowa, pretty close to the capital. We are a digital marketing, branding, web app development, website and app development company focusing on the PHP language. So I handle all of our technology for the company, and we just hired a junior sysadmin, so I've kind of focused on more long-term planning versus the day-to-day operations finally. So
very nice. Well, perfect. How about you, Rob?
My name's Rob Lyons. I work for Abco Research Associates. We're a manufacturing company, family run, owned out of Monticello, Illinois. Really as far removed from your normal IT as you can be. We're in the country, we're family run, and we do everything on-prem as much as we can. But I was brought on there to modernize their system. Small businesses, the problems they have, and they brought me on to resolve that, and that's what we're working through right now.
Okay, perfect. So plenty of modernization as we start to think, not only wrapping up this year, but also kind of what are the bigger rocks that we can look to take on in 2023. And so I guess to start, we recently released kind of an IT trends report looking at kind of some of the main drivers that we've seen from 2022, and we'll kind of use that as a base. And some of the themes that we started to pull out from that report is, everything from career happiness and kind of life IT admin, but then also understanding rising external threats, budget increases, decreases, and then a few different actually security kind of feature items, anything from SSO and MFA, but also a little bit more around biometrics, things like passwordless and that journey for different organizations. And then all the different tools that you leverage within your stack to kind of bring all of that to bear. And so I guess to start, so I know there's a kind of a litany of things as we start to think about what are the themes that we want to look at and kind of approach. And so I'm curious from our panelists today, are there certain things that resonate with you the most, kind of either from that list or kind of some of the other trends that you might be seeing and kind of steering into? So I guess we can open it up. We'll start with you, Rob.
So we've been, the biggest trends we've been dealing with is all the security problems. There's been a lot more, it almost seems like way more vulnerabilities than we've been seeing year after year, and handling that in a small business. I am the IT department of one, basically. How do you keep up on that? That's been our biggest thing that I've been working on and looking forward to resolving here in 2023. Keeping up on that is the hardest part of my job.
Yeah, a lot of threats are happening, a lot of different, all the CVEs, all the more 0 days, other things that might be coming into the fold. Steven, I'm curious, is security also top of mind for you? Or are there other things that you're kind of looking at as we start to close out the year?
Yeah, securities. I mean, I don't know if you ask any IT professional if they are like, security not top of mind. What's the answer? No, I kind of worry.
It's a loaded question, that's for sure.
I would love to not have security be the top of mind at all times, but yeah, I mean, other than security, budgeting is a huge thing. We're about just under 60-person employee company right now, and we have a new venture launching early next year that is, if all goes to plan, forecasted to bring quite a bit more into the organization than we traditionally seen. So budgeting around that, because we have some lofty goals for next year, and I spent maybe $4,000 on security cameras, but we don't tell the CEO that this year. So kind of justifying some of these purchases I've made throughout the year as well.
Yeah, and that's actually been one of the bigger themes too, kind of taking a pulse of our IT admins. We've seen that, specifically when it comes to security and spending kind of around budget, we kind of almost saw a little bit more of a duality. Half, say 40% of folks or more are expecting decreases in kind of security, kind of budget overall, kind of making them, and there's some worry there, might make them a little bit more vulnerable than what they already have. And then we have other organizations where it's like, actually it's not the same, or we might be able to carve out, earmark, a little bit more for security cameras or whatever those other pieces might be. And so I'm curious, just kind of as a pulse check between you two, are you expecting about the same? How drastically are you expecting your budget to change kind of within the year? And are there other pieces like a new venture, other things that might swing that?
Sorry, I'll just jump on that one.
Go for it.
I am in a semi-unique position, I believe, in that I there is a budget for IT and hosting and all that, but it doesn't really affect me too much. I am in a good position, that the CEO and COO both understand that, like, I have the best interest at heart for the company when it comes to purchasing and maintaining costs and stuff. And so if I tell them that, hey, we need to get security cameras for this building, we have hundreds, thousands of dollars of technology in here that, and a ton of windows. If, or hey, I'm gonna need $20,000 to upgrade computers this year, it sucks sometimes, but at the end of the day, they know that it's the cost of business, and I may have to wait till next month, but they'll get it done. So.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah,
Rob, how about yourself? I know it's kind of a different situation, kind of, one-man band, but
when I came in, I mean, their network was a D-Link router from Best Buy running the entire complex. There was no security, so yes, my security budget is definitely going up this year, both in stuff for remote access, VPN, which they never had before. I'm migrating over from their single Macintosh desktops with whatever antivirus they threw on it to, moving to CrowdStrike. So there's going to be costs with that. And so, yeah, but I don't think it's going to be too bad. And my boss more or less lets me just get on with it.
And I think one of the interesting pieces, especially kind of using security as a linchpin, because it's always in the news. I don't want to say, it's ever present, but there's usually things that are catching you either within conversations like this, where we're kind of hopping in, talking to other folks. And you kind of lean on some of those elements of saying, hey, we need it, right? Because there's such an ongoing threat that's kind of outside of the realm. Now kind of taking on a different approach, or when you're looking at kind of budgeting or looking at items that aren't as, I'd say, coveted or sexy as kind of other security upgrades, how do you manage to kind of have those conversations where it's a little bit harder to kind of describe intrinsically the value that might be bringing to the organization, or something that you feel passionate around, either whether it's kind of improving the overall posture, right? And this is kind of one other piece that fit within your larger plans. I'm curious, kind of how do you approach those conversations when it comes to budgeting, planning, and kind of adding that into your priority mix?
In our case, we had, before I got there, actually, they had a case of corporate espionage. And a break-in, as well as I can't remember if it was one of the crypto locker, but one of the viruses just destroyed, fortunately not the main database, but just about everything else. So they kind of had going in a grasp of, this is what goes wrong when you don't pay attention to security. But yeah, it is hard, because how do you describe to the guy that does most of his time in working with the metal, the machines, about well, this server is going to be vulnerable if we don't do this, and we don't. It's like, what does that do? So trying to explain that, yeah, there's a certain level you have to kind of just level that field, just talk about that, and just be there.
Baseline, we're doing it.
Hopefully they'll listen to you.
I echoing from what Rob said, I'm kind of in a our CEO and founder built his first website in 1990s or whatever. And, so at our very heart, we've been a web development company. So he's always understood computing. So it's, yeah, I have to, more, convert what I'm saying into English, I guess, for everyday people, for him a little bit, but not nearly as bad as, I'm sure Rob has to when you work with manufacturing and metal equipment all day long.
The owner of the company started in '86, and if I remember correctly, he ran the entire company off an Apple II GS. Wrote most of the software himself. But
Nice.
that was the original owner. It's long since moved on from his hands.
But I'd say given the timing and the tools available at the trade, that's pretty impressive in its own right. And I think, thinking about that, right? So kind of having some of that tooling, thinking about where it needs to be modernized, what can we upgrade, kind of other pieces. Rob, you mentioned something in terms of, just kind of introducing this to users, making sure that, whatever changes we might be making on our side, there's an impact, there's a ripple effect that end users might see, come to understand. I'm curious, does that change kind of how you approach or kind of prioritize some of your projects? So for example, if you have something that's no touch, but it takes a lot of your time, or not so much of your time, but impacts more of your users. How does that kind of come into the fold when you're thinking about approaching that and kind of adding it into your priority?
The not messing with the user's workflow is probably number one. I mean, don't mess with that if you can help it. Cost and retraining, pushback, any untold reasons why they'll be like, "Oh, we don't want this." It's just one more reason for them to not say no to
Mm-hmm.
you and what you need. If it's not going to mess with their daily work. But some of that has to happen. Getting rid when I came in, like I said, small business. What's one of the things they do? One login for the whole computer for everyone. Well, that's got to go. That's not going to fly. And so yeah, there was some of there where I had to teach them that, but like I couldn't enable MFA directly. Why? Because they don't have any concept of that, and it's hard enough getting them to change their password every 90 days. Mind you, I'd love to not do that, but PCI compliance being what it is. And so, getting them into that, easing them into it. And so it is very, very important not to mess with their workflow if you can help it.
Stephen, how about you?
Yeah, not changing workflow is huge. I learned firsthand how hard it is to get people to change their workflow when I first started, because when I first started, there was no formal any type of IT person before me. It was the CEO and COO. And if you look, it's funny, if you look in our Slack channel and just search for hashtag not a sysadmin, and so many times our lead developers, our C-suite, just every other day. So I came in and kind of evaluated everything over the first year and before getting a game plan together of what was going to have to change. But as Rob said, unfortunately, you kind of have to make these changes. You don't really have a choice. And so, the approach we did was start with the small to build the trust of the end users, and that, it sucks in the beginning, of course, but I'm doing what's best for the company, even if you can't, even if it doesn't sound like it right away, and then building on from there. So like when we adopted Jump Cloud, for example, the only thing we did at first was Google, Gmail, and Microsoft authentication. That was all we did at first, because it was just a quick, easy buy-in. They realized it wasn't going to do much. After that, we started adopting our computers into it, so doing, managed devices, servers, and then we started building out the SSO applications and everything from there. So.
Yeah, I think there's elements, right, and kind of not messing with the user workflow, kind of understand, because usually you're introducing friction, right, and say like, this is new stuff that I wasn't planning on, right, now it kind of affects me in my role. And usually there's a little bit of a larger organizational pitch. Hey, you're doing it better for the company, kind of let's keep all of our ducks in a row. I'm curious when it comes to technologies that help enable that. So Robbie mentioned MFA. If budget wasn't an issue, right? So and then you're kind of looking at other pieces to have that, would your organization look to adopt things like biometrics or kind of go down a passwordless journey or kind of other pieces where you're trying to blend a little bit more of security, but also reduce some of the user friction there. I'm curious, when you're thinking about planning for that or kind of planning for user training, how much of that comes into the fold and say, hey, we're going to introduce this, but it's also going to reduce this, right?
We're I am really looking forward to seeing how passwordless, especially since we're basically the house of Macintoshes. My servers are running Linux. We've got 2 Windows PCs. The rest are Macs, and all the anger I've developed dealing with that too. I came into this company right as Monterey was coming out. Jump Cloud, yes, because I needed an MDM now because they were running 2011 Macintoshes, and yeah, it was a nightmare. Um, and I'm they're like the fingerprint reader. I
Mm-hmm.
really would like to implement that because that would be something that I could put my finger on that and not care. It's so out of the way. It's so easy and understandable. I would love to be able to implement that. So I'm really looking forward to seeing where that's going.
Yeah, I would love to say that we're a 100% Macintosh shop, as much as Rob may hate that and other IT professionals do. But
I love it and hate it. It's
yeah, when I started, we were 90% Windows, 10% Mac, I'd say, and now we're 80% Mac, 20% Windows, because um, uh, possibly shocking to hear, but I've found that the Macintoshes provide us less issues overall for administration. The Windows is what causes 90% of our issues. Um, I think that's partially because we're in Jump Cloud, so we have the MDM solution, and I can push out profiles and configuration changes seamlessly through that. Whereas we don't, we're 20% Windows, so I'm not going to pay for Intune or anything like that because it's just financially not really worth it. But yeah, I'd love for the fingerprint in the Macs to start rolling out. I know the big issue right now, at least for me, is that Firefox doesn't integrate with the built-in Touch ID, so I can't use that to authenticate into something else that does biometrics. So I'm hoping that over the next couple of years with Apple and Apple, Microsoft, and Google, I think are the 3 pushing
Mm-hmm.
for it, we can start getting Firefox and some of the other major browsers to start supporting it and other software as well.
Yeah, it does take a push, right? Because I think anytime you're introducing some of these experiences, you can feel localized, right? And you're like, great, I can get my fingerprint into one thing, right? Versus looking at the totality and kind of understanding everything that users might have to log into and kind of how do you audit that, and the list goes on and on. The other piece that I'll say is you're actually in good company. And so kind of looking at one the pieces of the trend report that we looked at was kind of what's the makeup of current devices, and kind of across the 200 different organizations that we're looking at came back in. So it's actually about 60% Windows, and then 20 Mac, 20 Linux, and keeping in mind people have a bunch of different Linux server racks, other pieces that make up that bulk. But in terms of trending up, we're actually more folks are predicting that they'll be spending money with Microsoft, kind of having more Microsoft-based laptops, and then right behind it will be Mac, and then kind of Linux will be a little bit more stable. So some of the elements that we're starting to see across from that, and some of it could be pricing, some of it could be user preferences, and kind of coming into the management of the fold. You mentioned something when you're thinking about kind of, hey, we want to introduce a new solution, or kind of we want to enhance something, or look at how it kind of makes up that stack. I'm curious from both of you, kind of how do you approach your evaluation when you're looking at vendors, new other pieces that you kind of say, okay, we need to achieve this objective, right? And it could be driven by compliance. Rob, you mentioned PCI, or other pieces that the organization's looking at. How does that come into your decision making when you're thinking about, what's your ideal tech stack? And two, kind of the ultimate finality is like, if you're looking to reduce funding, when's the time to kind of move solutions on, or you're able to remove that duplication, if you will.
I reevaluate pretty much everything we have every year, which has been 3 so far that I've been there. But they had a problem where they got really, really behind. They didn't upgrade hardware, they didn't upgrade software. They were stuck on old, outdated, their system was FileMaker based. They were still running FileMaker 16 when 19 was out. Won't even run on current operating systems. Not getting stuck in that situation is my key one. Is it still supported? If it's not going to be supported in another year or two, I'm looking at moving off of it already, because I want to be gone by the time they are. I don't want to get stuck trying to work with that again.
Yeah, I agree with Rob in that if the support's not there, and it's not going to be something that I even go for. I talked about this at one point when we started doing a single sign-on solution. That shocking, I think, to nobody. The two choices were Okta and Jump Cloud, and it was hands down. Even if I think they were roughly equivalently priced for what we were looking at doing. And even if the price was 10-20% more for Jump Cloud, I think we still would have gone with Jump Cloud, because the support of, not only the supporting of the hardware and the devices that we have, but also the community support that Jump Cloud has been phenomenal. So that, I think, realistically, I'd like to say this isn't true, but price is probably always the very first factor. But then, point 1A is support. And if that exists, I would easily rather pay a little bit more if it means that I have an easy support channel, because in the long run, it's going to mean that I spend less time debugging something versus, just talking with the support channel and getting answers there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit on an important point, right? And so kind of price is one consideration, right? It's kind of when you're looking at, anything else that we're purchasing within our daily lives, there's a piece of that, but then there's all these other additional factors, right? So one is, hidden cost of support. Others might be like the hidden cost of integrating it into other stuff, right? Does it talk to all these things, right? You mentioned kind of looking at, adding in elements of biometrics, Firefox, like how do all these different pieces come together? And so you mentioned kind of, hey, if support, price and kind of support 1A, I'm curious, what are some of the elements, or kind of if you want to just walk through kind of a mental checklist in your mind of things that you look for, right? If I were to present you with some amazing, new technology a friend introduced, kind of like, what would you go through in your head to kind of say, oh, is this right for me or not? Or should I put this in kind of a bucket of, hey, this is a big rock that maybe we can look at within 2023 or next year, kind of other pieces?
Yeah, I mean, when finding new vendors or software, a transparent pricing model is always the first thing I look for. I understand it sometimes, but I hate the companies that say, oh, you have to talk to sales to get a price estimate, because it doesn't instill the confidence that, if I go to Chase for a new solution, he's going to charge me $10 a user per month. But if Rob goes to Chase for the exact same thing, he's not going to charge Rob $5 a month per user. That doesn't instill confidence in me. And I understand at the end of the day, every company in the world is, there to turn a profit, or at least to become stable, but also do that without destroying, messing with your clientele. So yeah, transparent pricing. What does the community support look like? That's not even including, taking Jump Cloud, for example, it's not even including Jump Cloud staff, but the public Slack channel, the community forum. But then also, what does the staff support look like? And integrations. When we moved to Jump Cloud, we ended up bumping a couple of our software plans up because they paywalled single sign-on. And while it sucks to swallow that cost, it also saves me time, and it saves our employees time when signing in to things or trying to figure out passwords. For me, it was onboarding and offboarding employees. We have a very large contract with the state of Iowa that, we have to be compliant in certain things. So if we terminate an employee for whatever reason, I have to have their stuff gone within, an hour. Previously, it took me half an hour to do everything, but with Jump Cloud, I can deactivate 90% of the stuff with the single click of a button. So that's kind of, what I go through: price, support, and integrations.
Yeah. Okay. Rob, how about you? What's your mental checklist look like?
Well, like he said, price, and oh, so aggravating when you can't get a price on something. I understand if it's like over 500, contact sales for a custom quote, fine. I got 15 people. I need to know what it's going to cost, and I'm not going to call you and waste my time. Does it work with my current stack? That's a big one. Does it support SSO? Again, user workflow.
Hmm.
Already got pushback on them changing passwords. I want it to work with Jump Cloud for identity, confirmation, authentication. Thank you. Things like that. After that, it's a matter of trying it out, seeing if it works. Again, what is the cost for each user? What's that ratio? How much does it increase over what we've got? Um, but I think the biggest one is, does it prevent tool sprawl? Does it fit into our current stack? And does it have single sign-on? And still be affordable?
I think it's something Rob said uh, reminded me of this. I think everything that both of us said, I agree with. And then on top of that is, what does the contract look like? I won't name them, but we have a creative vendor that we use that unfortunately locks us into, we buy X licenses and we have to pay for X licenses for the entire year. And if I add one in the middle, I can't remove it later on. JumpCloud and a handful of other vendors are really nice in that they have a testing policy. So if I want to add in, conditional access, for example, and test it for a month or so with myself and my junior sysadmin, I can do that without having to sign a new contract or upping my price. Or even if, like I said, even if we are in an annual subscription, if I can just pay for 2 months upfront for me to test that new feature, as long as it's not like another $2,000 for 2 months, I'll go ahead and do it. But yeah, once you lock me into a year contract where if I want to even test something, I can't do that. That's not, it's kind of a hard sell for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit on an important one. We actually had a comment come through from Jacob, he said, question one, does it do what it needs to do, right? Is the solution actually, hitting the problems and the use cases that we need to solve from an organization? Because then very quickly you can see, well, it has 80%, but covers these gaps. And then is that another 20% that we need to then cover for? So kind of Rob, come back into your comment of, does it prevent tool sprawl? Does it, is this another nice to have that we can add in, or is it truly something that's net new but critical, and we kind of agreed to it from an organizational perspective that it's worth that additional overhead to kind of come into it? And it feels like once you get that, it's got to be right there, right? Or really solve that crucial issue for it to kind of have let's say an impact in terms of how you think about things holistically and looking at that. One element of that that we've discussed here on previous webinars and other elements is kind of this notion of total cost of ownership, and really kind of that total cost to you're thinking about end user workflows. So Stephen mentioning kind of hey, unfortunately there's a few SSO providers out there, right? So if you're ever curious, go to sso.tax and there's kind of a list of folks that you kind of have to pay for the additional premium feature. But you do that in a sense to say, okay, well now I can save time. Now onboarding and offboarding at a macro level is much easier for some of those elements. And so I'm curious, when you're thinking about either fighting for more budget or kind of asking other things, how often does that sense of kind of really having that totality of kind of total cost of ownership or total things that might impact you, right? Especially Rob, everything, all the buck stop with you, right? And so how much does it impact your timing, expertise, and kind of elements and all of those pieces when you're thinking about those types of decisions?
I'm lucky enough that I get to take my time to experiment and test out and figure out what I want to deploy. More or less, it was a clean slate. And as I said, stuff happened. They understand the value of this. They let an employee go. She'd been there for 20 years almost, and
Mm.
all the email accounts and stuff took them 2 months for our office administrator to find everything and change it over. It took me 30 seconds to disable her account on the computer and stuff that I had control on. So I'm lucky on that respect. I more or less, once I've made my mind up, they'll just be like, yeah, go ahead, buy it, it's reasonable. So yeah, like you said, I'm a bit of an oddball in that respect.
Well, and so a question came in from Jake and kind of adding into that fold, right? And so we've been talking about SSO mainly from end user flow and other pieces, but we've also talked about the offboarding aspect, right? And thinking about provisioning. Do you also look for, especially for applications, the ability for them to have skim provisioning specifically when you're thinking about adopting it? And does that accelerate things, or is that table stakes baseline, or kind of how does that fit into your point of view and perspective?
For me right now, skim is something I'm looking into later on. I'm still setting up some of the infrastructure at our place because I spent the first year just observing basically and putting out the fires. I spent this last year actually implementing stuff. And so yeah, skim's still on the table for me a little bit further down the line. Right now, I'm just working on authentication period.
Fair enough. Stephen, how about yourself?
Yeah, skim is a nice to have. It's really frustrating when it doesn't exist. I'm lucky in that I have a development background, so I majored in computer science with an emphasis in software engineering. So I love programming. I know I'm good at it, in my opinion. I don't know if other people agree with me. So the skim provisioning is really nice. If it doesn't exist, I'm sometimes okay with it, because if they have an API system in the backend that I can use to provision, deprovision stuff, we developed a custom application internally to track a lot of stuff for us. It's a combination like asset management, HRIS, a couple of other things. And so with that, extending it to provision, deprovision, manage accounts to other software that doesn't support skim but does have an API for their user backend is easy enough. It takes me a couple hours to get it integrated. So API and skim are the two things I look at, but of course there's always going to be a handful that we have one that doesn't support skim at all, and then to access they give you full access to their API system except for the users. You have to pay for their enterprise plan to get access to the user API calls. So that's, but just add it to the list if it's something that we can't do without, and it's on the checklist of stuff to create and delete and onboarding and offboarding.
One of the elements when you're thinking about that cost, and so kind of another piece from the IT trends report, and so we'll go ahead and kind of add a link to that in the chat for all the folks listening in. One of the pieces that was interesting so far, we'll kind of see how the macro environment kind of develops and evolves as we've seen it unfold, is that inflation in particular has been hitting a lot of budgets pretty hard, because a majority of budgeting is kind of tied up now within more licensing costs. When you think about all the different applications, things that people are doing, it's less of an on-prem, but the things that they want to get into, the areas and so all of those costs are rising. However, kind of more from a recession standpoint, businesses in general are still kind of humming along. I don't think that Main Street has quite hit it as much as Wall Street has seen it so far. But I'm curious, from your perspective, are you seeing the same things kind of when looking at across, or kind of forecasting a little bit for next year, kind of adding in a little bit more of a buffer, either from inflation or kind of pricing adjustments that you're predicting, kind of across all the different vendors that you're working with?
We have a vendor who got acquired 3 or 4 years ago, and every year after the first year they've raised their prices between 10 and 15%, and so even if they don't do it, we factor in the 10 to 15% price increase. A Slack recently raised their prices, for example, and they gave us a heads up months. I don't even think it's in effect until the beginning of the year. So they gave us a heads up months in advance. So it was easy for that. But the vendors that do it last minute, it's hard. So we kind of just throw an extra 10, 15% on top of whatever the end number or final number is and just go off of that. And if we're under it, sweet. If we're above it, sometimes it happens. And by sometimes, I mean every single year since I've started, actually. I had our accountant tell me I needed to rein in our hosting costs, and I was like, I can do it, but we're gonna have clients without websites if I do that. So that was a pretty quick end to that conversation.
There's an impact to that for sure. Rob, how is that a kind of a similar mental tax you're thinking about for next year?
Yeah, being a smaller company, I get to keep it kind of simple. I already budget 25% of the cost of all of our hardware to replace every year. But we don't gotta replace it every year. And fortunately, I don't use it or lose it. So I get to roll that into next year's budget and the year after that. So I always have X amount left over,
Cool
so
buffer.
as increases. Yeah, yeah. And of course, oh, they suddenly change the amount this is costing this, for the next 12 months. Well, I've got the money for that, and we can adjust that, and I get to keep it around there. Yeah, 20%. I replace the equipment on a 5-year cycle is what I expect, because that's generally how long Macs lasts. So I base everything kind of around that. 5% unexpected equipment add replacement, you get your 25%. But that's not going to work for a lot of companies. Listen, I'm lucky. Small business, I get to keep it simple, stupid, which is good because I was not that good at math. So
All right, so I guess another question, well, just a little bit of math for you, Rob, but we'll kind of keep the model there. There's a couple of different models when you're thinking about how much of a change that you're looking to have within your organization. So you could say, hey, we want to keep 80% of what we have intact right now, but we're going to change kind of a 20% there. For organizations that might be growing a little bit faster, kind of expecting some headcount, maybe it might be more 50-50, right? We're going to keep half of what we have right now, but now we're going to explore, new use cases, new areas. Hey, security is bigger for us. We're expecting a bigger budget, so that way you can have that. And then you have all the way at the opposite end, right, where I'd say, fast growing startups, they're hiring folks, they don't know what to do with themselves. 20% baseline, but really 80% of the tech stack is now kind of open for discussion. We're looking at, SSO providers, we're looking at MFA, we're looking at all these different pieces that might be moving, more of a tectonic shift within the organization, kind of within that. So I'm curious, just kind of a pulse check between your two organizations, kind of how much of a shift and change are you expecting coming into the new year? Like, have you had a chance to have a, I'd say a solid, reliable stack, or there's still a lot of changes that you're hoping to hit or kind of have in terms of outcomes looking at next year?
historically, we've had a very stable stack. Like I said, the small business, family run, and they didn't have any IT, no structured IT at all. Um, so yeah, I'm coming in, I'm changing, yeah, for the next 5 years, everything, more or less. Yeah, the only thing I'm letting is you get to keep the Macintoshes. I'll work within that. But storing everything on your hard drives, no, that's going away. You got a NAS now. Things like that. So I kind of lost my train of thought there, and that derailed and took out an entire small village just now, actually.
I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity for you to come in and change, right? Even so, there's, hey, you
Yeah.
get to keep your Mac tots, but everything else around kind of your world is kind of within that domain, or at least you have the optionality to change it if you so choose.
I do intend to eventually, yes, I want it to be a fairly solid stack. Change what we need to, either because security requirements have changed, whatever compliance has changed, uh, workflows change, whatever. But generally, if I can keep them just doing their job as they need to, I've done what I need to do. No point in just changing it for no reason whatsoever. Um, but yeah, eventually I want a nice solid stack. It's nice to have that. It's nice to know what you're going to be doing the next year.
It's
And
helpful
not
to have
have HR come in like one of the, oh, hey, we got 22 people starting in 3 hours. You got computers for them?
Had
Sure
that
do.
happen before.
Not right here. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm, come December, 5 years at WebSpec now. I've over the last 5 years, I've made a lot of changes in what's happened, and I think that we're finally at a point where I'm not changing enough. I'm not changing things that are affecting our users in the immediate. So the biggest thing that I have right now is CentOS 7 goes end of life in mid 2024. So I have to figure out how to migrate 3,000 of our websites to some other operating system. So a lot of the bigger initiatives and projects that are coming up for me at least are back end stuff that don't directly affect our employees. So um, it's been nice and that I gained the trust. I destroyed it a little bit in the middle because of some just bad deployments and then rebuilt it. And now we're just kind of leveling out at a nice, happy area, hopefully.
I
Yeah.
never locked myself out of the network stack at all, ever.
Oh, I went to go, one of our switches, I was moving it to a management VLAN literally just 2 weeks ago, and it dropped. I didn't have any connectivity, but it was still routing stuff, so it wasn't a huge issue for me to readopt it. Last night I went to readopt that switch and killed our entire network stack for some reason, which is insane because it wasn't even at the top of the topology, and I had to restore backups 3 times before I got it all back online.
Yeah, I was fortunate that I had just backed up the configuration file and had a serial console cable around. It's
Nice. I don't own a serial console cable, but I've thought about buying one just as a CYA type of thing.
$30, do it.
Yeah, it's kind of where I'm moving to, especially after last night.
But I mean, that's a great example, right? Where you start to think about some of the small things that kind of also act as insurance, if you will, for some of the larger systems, processes, things that you're looking to implement and have some of those pieces. So we're getting a little bit closer on time, so I just want to take a quick time check. We'll actually introduce a quick poll here for our audience as we start to dive in, as well as if you have any other questions for our panelists today as we start to close out the session, please feel free to add those in. So we'll take a quick minute for the poll and we'll dive back in. Well, as we look to kind of close out the year, I think this is one of those elements where you start to enter, at least for me mentally, kind of a little bit of a time of reflection, understanding how you got to where you are within the year, kind of, and then also hopefully lots of hope and optimism of where you want to end next year, of kind of bringing that into the fold. And so just as some closing thoughts for our audience, kind of other IT admins that are listening in, either here live or on the recording, I'm curious, do you have any kind of your own resolutions or other pieces that you're looking to tackle within 2023, kind of bringing that into the fold?
A smooth transition to Windows 11 in Ventura. Send
We've already
lots
ran
and
Fair
lots of
enough. That feels like that was top of mind.
we've already ran into issues with Ventura. This is my fault. I had the policy management for the software deployment misconfigured, so it was delaying minor OS updates, but it was not deploying major OS updates. So one of our developers updated, and it broke everything. So we're dealing with that now.
Doesn't help when Apple puts out a required minor update to stop it from running out the major updates a whole whopping 1 hour before they release the second
Yeah,
update. Yeah,
it's a good time.
yeah. Good thing I pushed it all out via Monkey first. I'm not bitter at all.
Details are important, especially when you think about implementation and user experience, and not messing with flows has been, topic number one, I think, for a lot of kind of these guiding decisions. Well, perfect. Well, I want to thank everyone, especially Steve and Rob, your time for hopping in, kind of going through how you approach the year, kind of how you think about planning, budgeting, what comes in the fold, how you evaluate different pieces of technology, and making sure that we're all set up for success as we start to enter in another year of the unknown, but hopefully, I'm going to be a little bit more optimistic to it. For those that are listening in, so we'll have a couple other webinars coming up, and so we're actually going to have CrowdStrike coming in here in a couple of weeks, and we'll be diving into some of these security topics that we talked a little bit more about, as well as we've also talked about a couple of different pieces from our IT planning toolkit. So we'll have a link to that as well as the IT trends report for you here. But thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, especially kind of a Tuesday, getting into, say, the US Thanksgiving holiday week, and for everyone else around. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we will see you again soon.